Now is the turn of James Latigo, ably represented by Rosalind Hackett.
Thank you. I'm going to read James Latigo's paper, who's not able to make it, in his words. Title is Revisiting Our African Religious Roots, Insights from the Luo Gang. Right from the beginning of my discourse, I will say a few things about what I am not saying and a little bit about what I will be saying. The first issue pertains to considerations of epistemology and the signification of Africa to knowledge. I do not buy into the thinking that ultimate knowledge in its universality assumes a national form or that some nationalities have a monopoly of knowledge. In other words, I do not think it is logically defensible to talk about African chemistry or African physics or African mathematics as a distinct species of these disciplines. That is, a mode of thought or logic which is exclusively African, a system of reasoning which is distinctly African. But having said that, I must immediately reiterate that there is another sense in which the signification of Africa to knowledge is argumentatively defensible. Not only defensible, but also evidentially sustainable. That is, to paraphrase Professor Kwesi Pra, quote, recognizing that there are distinct traditions, histories, chronologies located in specific societies in which a distinct strand of knowledge production and knowledge articulation as an epistemological fund within specific time frames can be traced. I am just a simple native clan member from the Luo Gang African nationality. A contingent reward I gained from agreeing to share a paper at such an august forum is that it enabled me to reflect more deeply on what ordinarily are fleeting thoughts that characterize everyday life in passing. The reward is inescapably contingent, since it is dependent on whether the thoughts are actually worthwhile reflecting on. The theme for this conference, Religious Freedom and Religious Pluralism in Africa, Prospects and Limitations, is thought-provoking, has been, and is very critical now and in the foreseeable future. To help me converse meaningfully on the theme, I adopted the topic, Revisiting Our African Religious Roots, Insights from the Luo Gang or Acholi. This choice of topic is of incredible significance to me, since it informs in part our mission at the Marcus Garvey Pan-African University's Community Sites of Knowledge towards restoration of the African heritage for the good of humanity. The conference theme suggests two concepts to interrogate, freedom and pluralism. Embodied in both concepts are elements of time and action. I will advance my arguments by relating the theme to the nascent concept of Africology and restorative justice, linked through what my good friend Professor Lutu Mukasa called cognitive atonement, notions that will be elucidated in due course. Let me anchor the discussion by alluding to three metaphors. The first relates to the use of a driving mirror in a vehicle or motorcycle. The driver of a vehicle or rider of a motorcycle relies on the riding mirror to reflect on what is behind in order to facilitate fluid forward motion. For the driver-rider to safely and comfortably proceed, it becomes a recipe for accident to ignore what is behind. She would be very uncomfortable to consider as inconsequential what is behind. The point is that we cannot ignore the past. In like manner, the arguments advanced here will of necessity revisit the past so as to bring the present and possible future into better focus. In the second metaphor, consider original Africa as a virgin woman lying sacredly and peacefully intact, undefiled. Some characters then chose to ruefully chain rape her. The products of the rape are birth of nation states like Uganda, Kenya, Tanzania, etc., so-called colonial states. The rapists then begin to tell their story. They do not want the raped woman to talk. and proceed to suppress her side of the story, not to be heard or even heeded too. In their calculation, her story is prejudged as primitive, uncouth, uncivilized, backward, evil, witchcraft, and so forth. Such adjectives do not even exist in the raped woman's language or mode of communication. By and by, most offspring of the rape products gullibly begin to parrot the rapist's version, because they've been incessantly schooled that the then virgin story and its means of expression is not worth listening to, should be dismissed, and any association with it discarded or shied away from. Third metaphor. Think about two separate organic plant species growing healthily, mango and pawpaw trees. Both are sprouting well and producing great fruits of their kind. The pawpaw plant sprouts plump fruits with many tiny black seeds inside, while the mango one brings forth succulent, juicy fruits encasing only one seed. Then, ingeniously, a pawpaw plant gets neatly cut and pasted onto an equally neatly cut stump of a mango tree. By and by, the two variety species heals up and attempts to grow as one entity. Sometimes I hear this kind of scientific ingenuity referred to as grafting, essentially messing up with divine creation and divine order of things. What manner of fruit, if at all, will this newly crafted plant species produce? The original remaining pawpaw stump will not be able to sprout again and will steadily wither, rot and decay away, unless the chopped off stem is brought back and resealed with the stump of its own kind. In a similar vein, the advent of the European colonization project in Africa set out to insidiously de-link from their roots key fundamental aspects of African culture, norms and practices that had remained African ancestors for generations past. Attempts to blend this with their own foreign methods in unsolicited marriage of convenience is turning out to be a project in futility, giving rise to discussions such as we are engaged with in this conference. Suffice it to intone Dr. Vandana Shiva that, quote, colonialism has from the very beginning been a contest over the mind and the intellect, end quote. Key questions. How do we as Africans of the current generation regenerate what rightly defines our norms, values, morals, and principles and re-establish a more hopeful future for our collective prosperity? How did the virgin woman succeed to remain sacredly clean, dignified, and intact? Could it be possible that listening to her suppressed story may offer some insights into repairing the visible cracks in the rapist's account? Why don't we humble ourselves and listen to her too? There's an African proverb that says, until the lion is able to tell its story, the story of the hunt will always glorify the hunter. Ladies and gentlemen, whether you like it or not, whether you believe it or not, the greatest singular event that has ever occurred in human history was the atonement of Jesus Christ, when he overcame physical death by reuniting his dead body with the spirit. None of us mortals here can even begin to fathom achieving such a feat. But in our own human capabilities and faculties, we can at least undergo cognitive atonement, i.e., humble ourselves, open up and free ourselves from pursuing only one brand of narrative, thoughts, and knowledge base. A glimpse of the driving mirror, historical memory. Permit me to quote rather extensively what a British explorer, Sir Samuel Baker, who entered the Great Lakes region of Africa from the north, wrote about the Luo Gong, or the Acholi society way of life back in 1864. Quote, after leaving the vast expanse of empty territories where wild tribes without any permanent habitations graze their invariably sickly cattle, we entered Shuli, meaning Acholi, territory up to the plateau. It was a relief to find ourselves in a pleasant climate with cool breezes. The first rains had started a few weeks earlier and turned the previously shriveled vegetation into luxuriant green. There was a striking difference not only between the hot, dusty air of the lowland and the affable climate up the plateau, but also in the pattern of land tenure. Shuli or Acholi are farming communities who live in permanent settlements, separately built 2 or 3 miles from one another. On one side of each settlement is kept exclusively for cattle grazing. The other side is taken up by neatly cultivated plots of simsim, finger millet, cowpeas, groundnuts, and other green vegetables. The natives believed in nothing. The curious fact remained that, without the slightest principle of worship or even a natural religious instinct, these people should be free from many vices that disgrace a civilized community. End of quote. In the first paragraph, Sabeka correctly recorded what he saw, but when he began to write about religion, he was obviously wrong. Oral tradition maintains that the Luogang nationality was kept alive, functional, and highly productive by a nuanced symbiotic relationship, coexistence and balance between its people, nature, and the spirit world. This was made possible by strict observance and adherence to sound cultural values, norms, principles, rituals, rites, and practices that ensured welfare of all the people was maintained and assured at all times. Any source of unhappiness would be dealt with decisively. Thus they were, like Baker said, quote, free from many vices that disgrace a civilized community, end quote, because their indigenous religion had clearly defined for them what was morally good and what was evil. Therefore, with full knowledge of what was wrong and what was right, they could consciously choose to do what they considered to be morally good and avoid the known evils. In such a society, everyone would satisfy their essential needs, achieve a responsible level of comfort, and lead lives of meaning and interest, as well as share fairly in opportunities for economic, cultural, and social interactions in the spirit of communalism unique to Africa's sense of belonging. For the future of the continent which we love and for which we work, to me the question of the rediscovery, unfolding, and restoration of African culture is at least as important as its political and economic liberation. This is critical in the current time, in which the European introduced civilization is threatened with stagnating materialism, and we can do well to benefit from important impulses from the humanism of African cultures and find our way back to the humanist ideals of our own tradition. We all have a belonging or spring from somewhere, so it is incumbent upon us to find the way back to our heritage, back to our roots, in terms of our belief system, religion, knowledge, culture, upbringing, how to manage and run our society, how to manage and relate with nature, and so forth. There is so much that has disrupted our own being. The demand, therefore, is for us to have a heart and feelings in the management of our affairs through a knowledge system that promotes human advancement while preserving the positive achievements of the human heritage. The thinkers of this notion, led by the late Professor Dani Nabudere, chose to befittingly refer to it as Africology, that's with a K. It is Afri because it is the knowledge that emerged in Africa at the cradle of humankind. It is ology because it is the word logos that was uttered from the heart at the emergence of human speech and hence human civilization. Africology is therefore the universal knowledge that existed at the cradle of humanity. Now this part I'm going to have to summarize, so let's do what I can do. This is linking the arguments to the conference theme, key facts. In the first place, we have to remember that the concept of religious freedom and religious pluralism are being raised now, but against certain conceptual and historical background. That is to say, they arise from the historical circumstances of a certain society, namely the Western society. These are challenges that have arisen from the failure or the experience of Western society in dealing with the problem of religion and the evolution of their society. So the whole issue of religious freedom and religious pluralism is a debate between these imported religion or imposed religion received as Catholicism, Protestantism, Islam, Pentecostalism, and varieties of other religious sects. If they want to check on you, and if you're a cult, they will refer to the history of your religion, how it started. That's a general picture, but what are we saying in terms of religious freedom and religious pluralism? We are saying that the issue of cognitive atonement becomes very important. Why? Because it then opens up the debate and asks, freedom for whom, pluralism for whom, what kind of society? Here in Africa you are talking, you see here, when these issues are raised in the West, it's already a society where you're dealing with individuals. But here in Africa you are talking about ways of life that are also linked to ways of knowing, ways of relating, ways of understanding, and ways of being. And this comes through in the case of Luogang, in matters of, for instance, conflict resolution, settlement of land or family disputes, and so on. Because here you may find that among the being that are considered maybe metaphysical beings, the spirit of the person who went, the spirit of the person who is to come. When we say cognitive atonement, what are we atoning for? We are atoning for previous and ongoing injustices. To borrow a term that religious pundits are familiar with, we are atoning for the sins committed. In terms of sin, there are people who have sinned against our history, they have sinned against our heritage, our ways of life, sinned against our land, sinned against our relationships with nature. In other words, there's been sacrilege all over. They are the people who call you animists. At the end of the day, yours is not even a religion. So the injustice committed against you has been an injustice in your ways of thinking against your way of relating. In other words, the religious perspective they came with, note this carefully, the religious perspective that has informed their mission and their ways of operation and their ways of relating here, that has been a perspective of cultural fragmentation and degeneration. Just read 2 more paragraphs. In the African perspective, the ways of living, ways of being, ways of knowing are all interrelated. Take the land away from me, I am spiritually impoverished. Break up my relationship with my clan, because this one is Catholic or Protestant or whatever, I am impoverished. Break up my relation with my totem, condemn my spirits and call them dirty spirits, only accepting the Holy Spirit as a spirit. That's fragmentation and degenerative. For the imported religion to establish themselves as a system of religion here and to operate, they must of necessity deny the African one. So the history of their presence and operations here is a history rooted in injustice. Just read his conclusion. Thank you. Is that all right? Thank you. While it's important for us to find our heritage, get together, re-strengthen ourselves and recoup our historical energies, the ensuing task is even harder but has to be done, because if we are saying Africa is the cradle of humanity, the mother of other humanities, then our salvation must by necessity encompass other civilizations, other humanities. The challenge is for Africa to set new terms of which other humanities are engaged, so that we have one enlarged humanity in which all of us feel we have a common obligation to each other. The gist of the matter is that we must overcome the trend of denial of the voice of cultural, ethnic, and religious identity and diversity. Thank you for your kind attention.